The tiny Caribbean nation of Grenada is stuck between a rock and a hard place because they're being pressured by the United States to help them spy on Venezuela. Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this is The Breakdown. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you know all that's going on in the world of legal and political craziness coming out of this administration. So, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the country of Grenada has confirmed that they received a request for the temporary installation of radar equipment and associated technical personnel at the Maurice Bishop International Airport. They confirmed that they received this from the government of the United States. Now, why would they be getting that request? Well, they're kind of strategic based on where they're located. They are 100 miles from Venezuela. So they're basically one of the closest island nations to Venezuela, and therefore that makes them a good location for this type of surveillance that the US government wants to conduct. Now, remember, this is part of a broader beef that's going on between the US and Venezuela. Well, let me rephrase, this administration and Venezuela, where the president has been ordering strikes on boats that are leaving Venezuela, claiming that they have drugs on board. Rather than actually seize the boat, the evidence, the drugs, and the people, this administration is just opting to blow them up. So we'll never know if they were in fact drugs on board or if this was just fishermen that are now deceased and their families have no recourse. So there's that. And unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate, joined by one Democrat by the name of Senator Fetterman, they blocked a measure that would have barred the president from using military force against boats in the Caribbean Sea. So remember, Congress is the one that's supposed to give authorization when it comes to waging war. He has circumvented that. And obviously, the Democratic senators were trying to beat that back. Several Republican senators joined in, including Rand Paul, as well as Senator Murkowski. So we have that. Now, getting back to what's happening in Venezuela. As I mentioned before, we had 4 boats so far that have been destroyed by strikes, and it's even got to the point where the president of Colombia has said that one of the boats that was recently attacked included Colombian citizens. So again, now this is highly problematic because you have other countries that are like, hey, we're not involved in this beef, yet our people are getting killed. So we're seeing an escalation. And now on top of that, we know that the justification for this is hella shaky because first off, Venezuela, the whole justification was Venezuela, Maduro, the president, he's a narco-terrorist. They're just sending tons and tons and tons of drugs to the US, and we've got to stop them. Well, here's the facts on this. Most of the cocaine in the region comes from Colombia. This is according to the United Nations. Fentanyl, which causes a ton of overdose deaths, more than cocaine, is produced in Mexico. So Venezuela plays no part in that, right? And again, the excuse is, oh, we need to get the drug traffickers. So if Venezuela is not the one who's producing fentanyl, they're not producing cocaine, really. They're definitely not the cannabis spot. So what exactly are they trafficking? But the real underlying thing, which has been made blatantly obvious, is that the US president is trying to trigger regime change in Venezuela and get Maduro out of office. Now, let's be clear. I'm no Maduro fan. I don't think he's a legitimate president. However, there's ways and ways to do this, and blowing up boats with civilians on it, to me, is not the pathway forward, right? There's that. So, with all of that being said, now Grenada gets dragged into the frame, even though they know nothing from nothing, are not interested, are not involved. The president now is like, nope, we want to use your land to be able to conduct surveillance on Venezuela. they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because if they say no to the US, history dictates that doesn't go well. I'll get into that in a moment. If they agree to do it, now they're going to get smoke from Venezuela. Because Venezuela is like, dude, I never did you anything, and now you're going to cooperate with the US? What's up with that? So the reason why Grenada would be a bit gun shy to say no to the US is because of the invasion that happened on October 25th, 1983. Now, it is not lost on me that this request from the US administration came within a month of the anniversary of that invasion. Could be coincidence. Somehow I doubt that. So let me give you a quick history of this. And I actually remember the invasion, yes, I'm that old, because it was something that was massively talked about on Caribbean radio. So, again, growing up in a Caribbean household, you live and die by Caribbean radio. So you hear about all the goings on that happen. And this was a very pivotal and scary moment in the Caribbean because everybody was like, whoa, what is going on here? So back in 1979, there was a bloodless coup that brought Prime Minister Maurice Bishop to power. His government was very cozy with Cuba and with the USSR at that point. And they did have some socialist principles that they were espousing. However, when you look at what was actually implemented, Maurice Bishop as prime minister was all about social and economic reform. So he was trying to basically eradicate poverty on the island. He was getting close to almost 100% literacy rate on the island. So there were a lot of positive things that were happening. And what ended up was the big triggering event was assistance they were getting from Cuba and from the Soviet Union to help build a large airstrip. So the US was like, there's going to be Soviet planes. Because remember, this is the Cold War. There's going to be Soviet planes. Russia's going to be able to bomb us. Freaking out over that. Prime Minister Bishop was like, no, we just trying to boost tourism. And the airport we have now doesn't cut it because it's too small. Well, US wasn't going to have that. So Prime Minister Bishop tried to, negotiate. He came to Washington, D.C. He tried to, smooth the ruffled feathers, all of that. It didn't work. And on the flip side, people at home were like, you're getting too cozy with the U.S. What's up with that? And a coup ensued. He sadly was taken out and killed along with other members of his administration. And then in all of this, the U.S. decides to launch Operation Urgent Fury. And this, like I said, was on October 25th, 1983. At that time, it was the largest military action since the end of the Vietnam War. And so they landed with 200 Army Rangers who parachuted in, and then the airport got seized. 500 more Rangers were flown in, followed by an additional 5,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division. And then you had a U.S. Navy SEAL contingent that came in. And then on top of all that, you had 2,000 U.S. Marine Corps amphibious and helicopter troops. So, of course, the combined forces moved quickly. They occupied the island, the airfields, the power station. They secured the university, not like the university was in danger, but be that as it may, there were 600 American students that were enrolled there. And there were some smattering of soldiers from other Caribbean nations, but far and away, this was a U.S. operation. So this is the context in which Grenada is examining this request for surveillance. Rock and a hard place. And so now, again, for looking at the bigger picture, this is encroaching on the sovereignty of other nations. Because I can assure you, Grenada does not want a whole bunch of surveillance equipment sitting in their country. They don't want to be involved in the beef between US and Venezuela. But they do not necessarily feel empowered to say no because of the fear of force. Is this the diplomacy we signed up for? Sound off in the comments and let me know what you think. I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this was The Breakdown. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep demanding justice. Take care.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.